Welcome to case study video number 10. This is a series of 5 frames that were taken to illustrate the most simple panoramic image techniques. It's looking into a sea cave on the north coast of Spain on a fairly dull evening when there was nothing really happening out towards the sea in terms of colour, so it was an ideal opportunity to start taking some frames. Now, I didn't have a panoramic head with me or a rotating base, so I was just using a ball head and doing this manually. I was shooting at 40 millimeters at an aperture of f14, and each frame was taken about 0.8 of a second. When you're shooting panoramas, there's a couple of things that you must do. One is use manual exposures to make sure that every exposure is the same, because if you're using aperture priority or automatic program mode or something like that, and the exposure is changing across the frame, they're almost impossible to blend. The second thing that you must avoid using is a polarizing filter, particularly when you're shooting out to sea with the sky in the frame, because polarizers do not polarize equally across the frame, and you cannot stitch multiple polarized frames together. They will not work. So that's two definite things, and the third one is set the white balance to some sort of manual setting, whether it's daylight or shade or something like that, or a specific Kelvin temperature. If you use AWB, you will find that the white balance will change as you move across the frame, and when you synchronize them, you're not synchronizing from the same base point. So you must use a specific white balance preset to make sure that all your frames are identical, and any changes you make to one frame will be identical across any number of other frames. So here we have it, a nice simple scenario where we are looking across some rocks in a sea cave, and there's some nice strata and things like that. We will start off with our normal preset, and I may make a couple of changes. The histogram is good. I might just drop my shadows a touch, add a touch of clarity, add a touch of vibrance and saturation, just to give them a little bit of a pop. I just pressed reset, so let's try that again. So I need to do my changes as I had before. This time with all 5 frames selected, press synchronize, and here we have our 5 frames. Once you have Lightroom installed, you can do a number of things directly from Lightroom, and one of them is merge to panorama in Photoshop. Now, you're asking your computer to handle 5 large TIFF files here, or DNGs as they were in this case, so it can take some time. This is the photo merge module in Photoshop, and we can choose any number of preset blending methods, and auto usually does a pretty good job, so we'll start with that. The files are already loaded in there, so we just press OK. Now, as I said, we're asking the computer to merge 5 fairly large files here. Each one of them looks like they're about 140 megabytes, so that's a fair old size of a frame. So it can take a little bit of time depending on the muscle power of your computer, in particular how much RAM you have in it, and sometimes you've just got to be patient. If it does take a long time, it's a cracking opportunity to go and have a cup of tea while you're waiting. This Mac Pro is fairly well spec'd up and does a fairly rapid job of this, so I can just blether away while we're waiting. Now, what is going to happen with this is we may well demonstrate one of the fundamental problems of panoramic photography. I know for a fact that this image, or this series of images, was not taken using a pano head, a specific pano head. It was just on a ball head. So we will see quite possibly that there's a significant amount of distortion in this panorama. And yeah, there we go. So it stitched the 5 frames together, but because of distortion, you end up with this type of situation. Now, the way Photoshop does it is it just creates masks for each individual frame, and you can actually see cracks between them. But if you just go layer, flatten image, then very quickly we have a nice seamless panorama where the files have been blended in very nicely. Now, in terms of what to do about this, there's a couple of things. What I would suggest is you can go straight into your crop tool and you can just go through and crop out the bit of the panel that is uncorrupted, and there we have it. Just a nice simple scenario. Alternatively, it looks as if this is folded in a little bit at the edges, so we can go in and Control A or Command A to select everything, go into the transform and get the distort button and just pull those edges out a touch, and just lift it a fraction. Now you are changing the dimensions or the relative proportions of this file, but the camera's done that already, so I mean you are seeing something that's different from reality as you experienced it. So there we have that situation where we've made a couple of corrections. We can go back in with our crop tool now, and we have a wider, more impressive panoramic image. I mean, no one's going to question the distortion that you put into that, and it's not going to make it look unbelievably ridiculous. But there we have it. Now, the big advantage of this file is if we look at its size, we have 1422 pixels in a 500 megabyte file. So that is a pretty big file. I mean, that is over twice as wide as a standard D800E file. So this could be printed out pretty big. Once it's been worked, once we've got these contrast and colors coming out, once we've taken care of some of these highlights in the foreground, we've got a not too bad file here. So that's how to do simple panoramas, but that's also how to be aware that the distortion within them can create problems, and you're not always going to get a file that contains all the information that you were hoping it was going to contain. So that's the close of case study video 10, and we will move on to slightly more complex scenarios in the next case study.